Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. Vladimir Putin is a master at mind games. He learned it on the job. Let me tell you a story tonight. The date was 5th December 1989. The location was Dresden, East Germany. This was Putin's first foreign posting as a KGB agent. On the 5th of December, the Berlin Wall had already fallen. There were protests. A group of protesters gathered at the KGB headquarters in Dresden. Putin was inside with his team. They called for help from a Red Army tank unit. The reply they got was this: "We cannot do anything without orders from Moscow, and Moscow is silent." So it was left to the young officer, Vladimir Putin, to defend his team and his documents. He came out to speak to protesters. He bluffed. He said, "Don't try to force your way into this property. My comrades are armed and they'll use their weapons." It was a lie, a dangerous lie, but it worked. The group of protesters withdrew. Today, Putin's troops are lined up on the border with Ukraine, 175,000 according to some estimates. Nobody can tell if this is a bluff. Is he going to war or just bargaining? He spoke to US President Joe Biden today. The outcome of this conversation will determine if Russia will invade Ukraine. On Gravitas tonight, we'll bring you the lowdown. Also on the show, the British Prime Minister has declared a $400 million war on drugs, even joined the police on a drug bust. But charity, they say, begins at home. Drug use apparently is rampant in the UK Parliament. The US has announced a diplomatic boycott of genocide games, the Winter Olympics in Beijing. China has threatened countermeasures. We'll discuss. In Switzerland, the government has approved what they're calling a suicide pod. It promises painless death in a minute. And the UAE has announced a 4.5-day work week. We'll tell you why they've done it and whether this boosts employee performance. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Authorities say there is now community transmission of the Omicron variant across England. Britain's health minister says it is too early to say if this will hamper recovery from the virus.
The northern countries impose a ban to punish the excellence that comes from Africa.
This as President Cyril Ramaphosa criticizes rich countries over the travel bans against South Africa, where the Omicron variant was discovered. 2 people were killed and 3 injured in a shooting in a public services center in southeastern Moscow. Reports indicate that the shooter is a former military man who has been detained. Hours after Syrian media accused Israel of striking the port city of Latakia, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett says that the military was constantly fighting bad forces in the Middle East. This was a rare attack on a port, which is a vital facility in Syria from where much of the imports enter the nation. Rohingya refugees from Myanmar are suing Facebook, now branded as Meta, for $150 billion over allegations that the social media giant did not take action against hate speech that contributed to violence against the community. Amid growing military incursions by Beijing, at least 4 Chinese military planes entered Taiwan's air defense identification zone. This marks the 5th intrusion this month. Ethiopian Prime Minister declares that his troops were winning the war against Tigrayan forces on local media.
Defeat is a strong blow to the terrorist groups that is currently.
The Ethiopian Prime Minister declares that his troops were winning the war against Tigrayan forces on local media.
Defeat is a strong blow to the terrorist groups that is currently in disarray.
Abiy Ahmed was filmed on the front line, saying that the victory will continue. The Ethiopian government claims that its forces have recaptured the strategic towns of Dessie and Kombolcha. A new study finds that coral reefs in the western Indian Ocean are at a risk of collapse in the next 50 years. Attributed to global heating and overfishing, the study examined coral reefs in 10 nations around the western Indian Ocean. Indian origin Anil Menon is among the 10 new recruits who will undergo 2 years of rigorous training before being inducted in missions on board the International Space Station, as the American Space Agency plans its first human missions to the moon in more than 50 years. Cricket's oldest rivalry is set to be reignited from Wednesday as Australia and England face off in the first test of the Ashes in Brisbane. England have lost 9 out of their last 10 tests in Australia and will be aiming for only their second series win down under since 1986. On the other hand, Australia have only played 4 test matches in nearly 2 years and are a bit short of match practice. The Confederation of African Football, CAF, has said that it is not looking to shift out or postpone the next month's African Cup of Nations over Omicron fears. The Continental Championships are due to be held in Cameroon from January 9th to February 6th, but the European Clubs Association has expressed concern about player welfare amid rising cases in several African countries, as well as the imposition of travel restrictions.
To begin with a war. Is Russia about to invade Ukraine? Tonight we have some disturbing developments to report. A critical meeting is underway. US President Joe Biden is speaking to his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. The reason is this. Look closely. This is the Russia-Ukraine border. The grab is from a US intelligence document. It is the latest assessment of the Russian build-up near Ukraine. The situation is worrying. Russian forces are building up at 4 sites. Why is this worrying? Because this is how wars begin. The US assessment says that the Kremlin is planning a multi-front offensive on Ukraine. It involves 175,000 Russian troops, 100 battalions of tactical groups fully equipped with tanks, artillery, armored units, drones, and electronic warfare systems. And that is why Joe Biden is speaking to Vladimir Putin. The US president wants Russia to pull back. The Americans have been building pressure for months. They haven't had any success. But now Biden cannot afford to wait for Putin to change his mind. Russian troops are dangerously close to the Ukraine border. America has only 2 options at the moment: send in troops to help Kiev defend itself, or force the Russian troops to withdraw. Which way will this go? Are we headed towards a war? What does Putin want? And can Biden convince him to de-escalate? On Gravitas tonight, we'll decode this dangerous escalation near Ukraine. First, let's discuss the developments at the border. We've been telling you about this for weeks now. There is massive deployment of Russian troops near eastern Ukraine, and this is nothing like what happened last spring. Remember, Russia had sent soldiers to the Ukraine border in March as well, March this year. They returned after a few months. Now they're back in bigger numbers. How many soldiers are we talking about? Close to 100,000. 50 battlefield tactical groups are deployed near the border. A reserve of contract troops is on standby. They can be mobilized if and when a conflict actually breaks out. The US believes that Russia has a plan to send up to 175,000 troops. 175,000. And this can happen as early as January 2022. Can Vladimir Putin be convinced to de-escalate? Well, that's Joe Biden's best hope. And that's why he's meeting the Russian president virtually. It's a tough assignment for Biden. And Moscow is not giving him reason to be optimistic. Even before the meeting began, the Kremlin ruled out any breakthrough.
There's no need to expect any breakthroughs from this conversation. It is a working conversation during a very difficult period. The escalation of tensions in Europe is off the scale. It is extraordinary, and this requires a personal discussion at the highest level.
So what is the Kremlin's game plan? Reports say Russia has laid the groundwork for a full-blown invasion into Ukraine. 3 developments confirm this theory. Number 1, Russia is building supply lines to support troops near the border. Number 2, Russian troops have conducted drills to rehearse an invasion. And number 3, Moscow's propaganda campaign against Ukraine and the West is building up. Let's break these down one by one. First of all, the supply lines. Any invasion, as you would know, needs logistical support. Soldiers on the front constantly need supplies, weapons, bullets, food, medical supplies, and a lot of other things. And to send all of these supplies, you need special routes. So Russia has its supply lines in place for a potential Ukraine invasion. Dedicated routes have been created. They can be used to send fuel and medical units to the front. Arrangements for an invasion are already in place. Reports say Russia can feed frontline forces for 7 to 10 days. They can feed other support units for up to a month. And Russian forces are not just well supported, they're also well prepared. Earlier this year, Russian forces conducted drills. They happened near the Ukraine border. Kiev has been closely studying the activities of Russian troops. They believe Russia has a battle plan in place. Russian forces have rehearsed mobilization measures. They've planned logistical support and the transfer of military contingents. They have all of this worked out. Russia's plan for an invasion into Ukraine is not just limited to troop deployments and weapons. Moscow is also using unconventional methods. Reports say the Russian government is running a propaganda campaign. Russian influencers have been put to work. They're pushing content to criticize Ukraine and NATO and to paint them as the aggressor, not Russia. That is the Russian playbook for you. Moscow has begun the battle without firing a single bullet. It's not just projecting strength through military deployments, it is also weakening Ukraine through influence campaigns and propaganda. As far as the Americans are concerned, Putin is in a position to launch an invasion. All he needs to do is give the order.
Know that Putin has made up his mind to use force, but what we do know is that he's putting the Russian military, the Russian security services in a place where they could act in a pretty sweeping way.
That's what the West is up against, an inscrutable Vladimir Putin. It has been a month since this build-up began. The Americans have tried to help Ukraine with weapon supplies, with tactical support, but they have not been able to decipher what Vladimir Putin wants. And that is a challenge before US President Joe Biden today. He'll have to read the Russian president's mind. He'll have to figure out why Putin has ordered such a massive escalation. Can the US president stop a war from breaking out, or will he end up being sucked into a conflict in his first year in office? This one is going down to the wire. And for Joe Biden, this video call is like a game of poker. His opponent is formidable. He's a spy from the Cold War, a world leader for 20 years. So calling Vladimir Putin's bluff is not going to be easy. That is, if Putin is bluffing. Joe Biden also desperately needs a diplomatic win. Less than a year in office, look at his report card. He made a mess of the Afghanistan exit. He's not making much headway with China. His Iran nuclear talks are still work in progress. So Ukraine becomes very important for Joe Biden. A de-escalation in Ukraine could give him a face saver. The question is, does Biden have the diplomatic chops? Here's what we know about his strategy. It's a tried and tested one. It's called carrots and sticks. Basically a mix of threats and outreach. What kind of threats? Sanctions, to start with. Biden could hit Russian banks. He could stop Moscow from converting their currency into dollars. It would be a big setback for trade. Biden could also target the oligarchs. We're talking about Russia's super rich. They're close allies of Vladimir Putin. You hit the oligarchs, you hit Putin. Another option for Biden is to close off the bond market. He can stop US agencies from buying and selling Russian government bonds. And finally, we have the nuclear option, figuratively speaking. Experts call it the sledgehammer. Joe Biden can expel Russia from the SWIFT banking system. What exactly is SWIFT? Let me explain. Imagine you're sending money from India to America or from America to Russia. So your bank needs a SWIFT code. It's like the key to any international transaction. No SWIFT, no international banking. That's how it works. The US can cut off Russia from this system. It would make Moscow a financial outcast. And this is Joe Biden's trump card. But will he use it? That depends on how President Putin responds today, how this conversation goes. Now, this may be a game of poker, but remember what's at stake here. The lives of 44 million people who live in Ukraine. That's what's at stake. Joe Biden cannot afford to push Putin too far. He has nuclear weapons. He has well-trained troops. And he has the weather on his side. There's an old saying in military circles, Russia's greatest ally is General Frost, or the Russian winter. History bears witness. Both Napoleon and Hitler, remember, lost to General Frost. So Joe Biden cannot afford to underestimate Putin. Where does that leave him? If the threats don't work, what can Joe Biden offer? Perhaps talks. That's part 2 of his plan. Lay out a diplomatic roadmap to de-escalate. This means implementing the Minsk agreement signed in 2015. But here's the problem. If Biden is offering talks, Putin will sense weakness. He will demand more concessions. Things that Joe Biden simply cannot agree to. It's definitely a tightrope for any diplomat. Biden is not entirely faultless here. His Russia policy has been all over the place. Think back to March this year. Joe Biden called Vladimir Putin a killer. And that's not the best way to calm tensions. Less than 2 months later, he invites Putin for a summit in Geneva. He offers to cooperate on arms control. He okays a Russian gas pipeline in Germany. Talk about mixed messages. Joe Biden has aced it. He says he wants a stable and predictable relationship with Russia. Good luck with that. Vladimir Putin is an unpredictable leader. Traditional diplomacy does not work with him, and Joe Biden does not have the appetite for conflict. His forces are already busy and stretched. They're focused on the South China Sea and Taiwan. Joe Biden cannot afford to open up another front, a new front, especially not after Afghanistan. So this is Biden's impossible checklist. 1, get the Russians to leave. Make sure the threat of war is removed. 2, retain influence in Ukraine. Make sure that Kiev remains in NATO's corner. And 3, a long-term peace plan. We saw a similar build-up in March and April this year. The same rhetoric, the same fears. Ukraine cannot keep living under this fear of invasion. There must be a long-term solution to this conflict. Joe Biden has a lot more to lose than Vladimir Putin. His European allies will be watching. Taiwan will be watching. Will the Americans dump another ally, or will Biden stand up for Ukraine? It is not going to be an easy negotiation. Putin is a seasoned diplomat. He knows when to push and when to pull back. He knows exactly what he wants from this crisis, and that's what we'll discuss next. It's a question that has haunted US presidents, 5 US presidents. What does Vladimir Putin want? Does he want war? Does he want respect? Or is it all about strategy? I would say a bit of everything. Let's start with war. Does Russia really want to invade Ukraine? I'm not sure about an invasion, but Putin would certainly like to control Ukraine. It's part of his grand project, rebuilding the lost Soviet empire. And don't mistake this for communist romanticism. It's about power, not about ideology. Here's what Vladimir Putin said about the Soviet collapse in 1991. I'm quoting, "First and foremost, it is worth acknowledging that the demise of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century." Remember, he's talking about the 20th century. We had 2 world wars, genocides, imperialism. But Putin believes the Soviet breakup was the worst catastrophe of the century. And he intends to reverse it. Ukraine was a Soviet breadbasket. It produced 25% of all agricultural output in the Union. So Putin's grand rebuild begins with Ukraine. In July, he wrote an article about Russian and Ukrainian unity. It was less of an op-ed and more of a love letter. Listen to what he wrote. I'm quoting again. Russians and Ukrainians were one people, a single whole. I would like to emphasize that the war that has emerged in recent years in Ukraine is a great common misfortune and tragedy. This is Putin. He goes on to write about Ukraine's history, about shared heritage and culture. It's basically a case for reunification. Now, some of you may ask, why Ukraine? Why not other Soviet states? Because Ukraine is slipping away from Russia's hands. Look at Belarus or Kazakhstan. They're both former Soviet states, but they're also loyal allies of Vladimir Putin. Ukraine is not. It is a growing democracy that wants to join NATO, and hence it is becoming part of a military threat. If Russia cannot control Ukraine, the West cannot either. That is Putin's strategy. He does not want NATO troops in Ukraine. He does not want NATO missiles in Ukraine. And most importantly, he does not want Ukraine to join NATO. These are Putin's demands, and reports say he wants them in writing. He wants NATO to stop expanding eastward. Will Joe Biden agree? No way. As a senator, Biden supported Ukraine's NATO membership. The White House may have tempered his support, but he cannot offer what Putin is asking. No U.S. president can promise to clip NATO's wings. It's a starter. So why is Putin making this impossible proposal? To extend this crisis. Foreign policy, you see, is a major selling point in Russia. The people love all the saber rattling. They also enjoy propaganda about Russia's glory days. Putin is delivering exactly that. Domestically, it helps him tighten his grip over Russia. And globally, it keeps him in the news, at the center of world affairs. Vladimir Putin did not become president to be sidelined. But that's exactly what the US is doing. They have reduced Russia, by the way, to a secondary threat. China is now the main villain for them. But Putin disagrees. He sees himself as an equal to the US president. It's a classic case of your reach exceeding your grasp. So to answer my first question, what does Vladimir Putin want? Many things. He may not want war, but he wants control. He doesn't want diplomacy, but he wants respect. And most importantly, he wants the West to vacate his backyard. And to be fair, nobody likes a rival expanding near them. But how do you respond, and how you respond, is an important indicator. Russia has responded with violence. It annexed the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. It violated Ukraine's sovereignty. It continues to do so. Moscow is arming and funding separatists in eastern Ukraine. It is not a choice between the West and Russia. Even Ukraine does not want to make that choice. It is being forced to by Russia's aggression. This is about a long-running history of proxy wars, big powers making pawns out of sovereign states, big leaders using neighbors to satisfy their egos. We saw it in Korea, we saw it in Vietnam, we saw it just now in Afghanistan. Putin and Biden will sit comfortably in their offices, chatting over video call and playing checkers with the country's future. The Cold War may be over, but its evil legacy lives on. And speaking of wars, the UK has announced one too. It's a war on drugs. It will cost the government nearly $400 million. Who will they fight? Drug gangs, they say. They'll also rehabilitate 300,000 drug users. That's the plan. It sounds noble. It's also a smart diversion. How's that? Do you know when the plan was announced? On the same day when traces of cocaine were found inside the British Parliament. They were discovered in multiple locations. A dining room in the House of Lords, an exclusive pub in Westminster Palace, a washroom located close to Boris Johnson's office, and another next to the office of British Home Secretary Priti Patel. Traces of cocaine were found in all of these places inside the Parliament. This was reported by the Sunday Times. It talked about an open drug culture inside the UK Parliament, a culture that Boris Johnson is trying to hide. He claims to be going after drug gangs, trying to rid the country of the drug menace. How about cleaning up your own house first? The report says that the British Parliament is rotting with drug abuse. Both seasoned lawmakers and young politicians are getting high before Parliament proceedings. They think they're untouchable, that they're protected by their friends in the bubble. Now, with their shenanigans out in the open, the question is, will they be penalized? Prime Minister Boris Johnson has refused to clarify, but others have. like Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons. He says this takes priority. He'll raise the issue with the Metropolitan Police this week. He said he'd flagged it in 2019 as well, when he had just assumed the post of the Speaker. What happened then? Clearly it wasn't important enough to pursue. Then we have Conservative MP Charles Walker. He chairs the Parliament's Administration Committee. He says the drug issue might be discussed in the House of Commons, and that sniffer dogs might be brought in this week to detect the presence of drugs. Meanwhile, the police have released some figures. And this is interesting. In 2020, at least 17 crimes were detected near the British Parliament, 17. And between 2015 and 2018, at least 38 drug offences were reported within the Parliament's premises. So which parliamentarians were involved? This, the Metropolitan Police is yet to reveal. The controversy is exploding. Boris Johnson is at the receiving end of some severe criticism. He's being accused of trying to divert away from parliamentarians. Instead, he's chasing drug dealers and casual users who he believes are the root of the problem. He posted this on Monday. Drugs are a toxic scourge on our society. Attached were some images of him, the Prime Minister of Britain, accompanying police on a drug bust. You must watch this. So this is what we have. Cocaine all over the Parliament, and the Prime Minister posing as a cop. Boris Johnson carrying out raids on suspected hideouts. The double standards are appalling. Boris Johnson's new policies even more so. Under his new war on drugs, users of Class A drugs like cocaine can lose their passports for an indefinite term. This is one of the proposals that has been made. Will this apply to lawmakers as well? Will their passports be revoked? Forget that. Will lawmakers be given a drug test? Boris Johnson's record is only going from bad to worse. He imposes a strict lockdown on his country and then throws parties at 10 Downing Street. He launches a war on drugs and turns a blind eye to the reportedly rampant drug use in Parliament. It doesn't help that on multiple occasions, the Prime Minister himself has admitted to casual drug use. It's worth looking at some of his statements. This is what he said. I think I was once given cocaine, but I sneezed, and so it did not nose. I tried it at university, and I remember it vividly. There was a period before university when I had quite a few spliffs. He subsequently denied being a user and has now upgraded himself to a cop on a mission to rid his country of drugs. We'll tell you when he raids the Parliament bathroom. Not far from Britain, another politician has sparked controversy. His name is Eric Zemmour. He wants to be the next president of France. To call Zemmour controversial would be an understatement. He was convicted for inciting racial and religious hatred. He believes Islam is a religion of terror. And during his first election rally, the crowd was busy throwing chairs and punches at each other. Our next report tells you about the man who's being called the Donald Trump of France.
The French far right has a new face, and his bid to become president led to this brawl. That's how divisive Eric Zemmour's nomination is. The longtime journalist to become the next president of France. But his entry into the poll fray has divided voters. So much so that a man tried to physically assault Zemmour when he was trying to make his way to the stage. Zemmour is perhaps the most controversial candidate in recent French history. The reason is his opinions. Zemmour believes France is engaged in a religious war with Islam. He wants to ban first names like Mohammed, and believes unaccompanied child migrants are thieves, killers, and rapists. Zemmour has been convicted twice for inciting racial hatred and discrimination, but that hasn't stopped him from declaring a presidential run.
L'enjeu est immense.
The stakes are huge. If I win this election, it will be the starting back the most beautiful country in the world.
De la reconquête du plus beau pays du monde.
Not everyone likes the idea. Far-left activists and political parties are openly fighting Zemmour. Some of them attended his first rally and clashed with his supporters. Others took to the streets. More than 50 organizations took out a rally against Zemmour. An anti-fascist group was leading the protesters.
We want to respond to all of those who say we want to silence the candidate. First of all, he's not any candidate. He has been convicted of racial hatred, and it is important to be reminded that those words, such as the Great Replacement Theory, lead people to carry out or plot terrorist attacks. And so we are letting people know we won't be tossed around like popcorn. We will be on the ground, we won't let go. And yes, to silence those people is part of our self-defense. Just like we silenced Dieudonné.
The presidential election in France is just 5 months away. Zemmour is the loudest among the extreme right-wing voices of the country. Support for him remains low, but even with his limited following, Zemmour is creating a lot of noise and making this presidential race in France the most divisive in modern times. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
China's Winter Olympics next year will be light on attendance. The United States has announced a diplomatic boycott of the Games. It's a start, but it's not enough. Countries like China are not worried about half measures, and that's exactly what this is, a half measure. Let me tell you what a diplomatic boycott means. The US will not be sending government officials to Beijing. American athletes will still participate. American citizens are free to visit if they're allowed, but there will be no official representative. Here's what the White House press secretary had to say.
U.S. diplomatic or official representation would treat these games as business as usual in the face of the PRC's egregious human rights abuses and atrocities in Xinjiang, and we simply can't do that. As the president has told President Xi, standing up for human rights is in the DNA of Americans.
If human rights are in the DNA of every American, then why are only diplomats being withdrawn? Why not the athletes or the sponsors at least? Many U.S. companies have partnered with the Beijing Winter Games, like Airbnb, Coca-Cola, General Electric, Intel. All these companies are based in America. They follow the American law. Why are they still pumping money into China? No answers. Neither from the White House nor from corporate America. I guess everything is fair in business, even genocide. If the United States is half-hearted, the rest of the world is not even interested. Britain says it will take a call later. France is waiting for the European Union, and the Australian government is reportedly divided. How the times change. These countries have blindly followed America to war. Their soldiers have died in US missions, but they can't agree to a diplomatic boycott. Tells you how powerful Chinese money is. Some countries like New Zealand have opted for a middle path. They will not be sending diplomats to Beijing. But guess why? Not because of the abuses in Xinjiang, but because of the Wuhan virus. At least that's the official version. Frankly, I don't know what's worse. Not even trying to boycott the games or boycotting under a fake reason. What is worse? Either way, China is pretending not to care. They say the athletes are the heroes, not politicians who clamor for boycott. Listen to this.
The Winter Olympics, held once every 4 years, is a rare opportunity for athletes to show themselves. The protagonists of the Beijing Winter Olympics are athletes from various countries, not individual politicians. Those politicians who clamor for boycott, for political self-interest, are showing off and hyping things up. No one cares whether they come or not, and it has no influence on Beijing's success in hosting the Winter Olympics.
As I said, half measures don't bother China. What we need is a global response. Every country, every athlete coming together to send a message. That's where sporting bodies are also important. Unfortunately, in most cases, they're complicit. Listen to what the International Olympic Committee's president said on Monday. I'm quoting, expecting that Olympic Games can fundamentally change a country, its political system, or its laws is a completely exaggerated expectation. The Olympics cannot solve problems that generations of politicians have not solved. Well, he is right. The Olympics cannot fix a country. It cannot change laws. But nobody is asking the IOC to clean up the world. All we are saying is stay away from the trash. Don't endorse genocidal games. Don't let autocrats misuse your platform, because if you do, oppressive regimes will plan to normalize themselves. Not that China needs any help on that front. Let me show you their latest piece on propaganda, a democracy summit. That's right, China is selling democracy to the world. Just when you thought you had seen it all, this is happening. On Saturday, Beijing hosted a virtual summit to share their version of democracy. Frankly, why do you need a summit for that? I can explain Chinese democracy in 5 seconds. One party, no elections, no free media, no judiciary, and a rubber stamp parliament. That is Chinese democracy for you. Nothing to brag about. But then again, this isn't about bragging. It's about changing the narrative. Joe Biden will be hosting a democracy summit this week. Russia and China have not been invited. So this is Beijing's response: host a summit of its own. To be fair, democracy is not anyone's monopoly. Certainly not America's. But to use China and democracy in the same sentence is a joke. So while diplomatic boycotts are a welcome start, the world must hit China where it hurts: money and recognition. And India, by the way, is not even joining this conversation. Democracies can no longer rely on half measures. And while dealing with China, especially because the military threat from Beijing is growing by the day, the PLA is in expansion mode. It wants more bases abroad. China has set its eyes on the small African nation of Equatorial Guinea. The United States is worried. That's because the new Chinese base, this one, could be right opposite the east coast of America. Reports say the Chinese are considering Bata in Equatorial Guinea. This is a port city. Bata already has a deep water commercial port. It was built by China. And now Beijing could set up a military base here. This would mean a permanent Chinese military presence in the Atlantic Ocean. That's practically America's backyard. From this base, the Chinese Navy will be able to rearm and refit ships. They will be able to challenge American dominance in America's neighborhood. Washington has been trying to block Beijing's moves. In October, American Deputy National Security Advisor John Finn visited Equatorial Guinea. He was there to persuade the country's leadership to reject Chinese overtures. Now, even if the US is able to block China in Equatorial Guinea, and that's a big if, the threat won't be over. The Chinese are challenging America from all directions. As of today, China has only one foreign military base. It is in Djibouti in Africa. But Beijing plans to dramatically expand its foreign presence. How will it do it? With the help of a time-tested technique, the Chinese checkbook, buying up foreign military bases. As of July this year, the Chinese had made serious headway in trying to secure new bases in Cambodia, Tanzania, and the United Arab Emirates. Washington managed to stop Beijing in the UAE. China was secretly building a secret facility at the Khalifa port. The Americans gathered evidence through satellites, and they held urgent talks with the UAE authorities. Apparently, the UAE was not aware about the Chinese activities. After a briefing from American officials, the construction was stopped. But the Americans have not been successful elsewhere. In October, rapid construction activity was underway at the Ream Naval Base in Cambodia. The United States believes the Chinese are engaged in construction activity here. In 2019, the Chinese struck a secret deal with the Cambodians. Reportedly, this deal allows Beijing to start military personnel, store weapons and dock warships at the Ream Naval Base. If work continues at this pace, Ream will be China's second naval base overseas. The challenge is truly massive, and we are not even mentioning Gwadar. Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative has become a vehicle to expand Chinese military presence. In Africa alone, Chinese state-owned companies have built 100 ports. Of course, Beijing says these are commercial ports and not military projects. But look at what's happening in Equatorial Guinea now. China first built a port here. Now it wants to leverage that and establish a naval base. China wants to project its military power well beyond its immediate neighborhood. It wants the ability to challenge the American forces in any theater of conflict. But more Chinese bases around the world don't just threaten the US. They're a threat for the entire world. And our last story tonight is about a concept. For a lot of us, it may sound too good to be true, but some of us, it is a reality. I'm talking about a 4-day work week, or should I say a 3-day weekend. I'm sure we've all dreamt about this at some point in our lives, a longer weekend. What if I told you that it's slowly becoming the norm? Very slowly, but it is. Countries around the world hopping onto the trend. The latest one is the United Arab Emirates. Starting next year, the UAE will transition to a 4.5-day work week, which basically means that the weekend will start at noon on Fridays. This will be after the Friday prayer. And those working in the UAE will not have to return to work till Monday. The weekend will be from Friday afternoon to Sunday night. How does it help? Apart from the obvious, the move is aimed at achieving two things. Number one is to align the UAE with global markets. So far, the UAE has had a Friday-Saturday weekend. They work from Sunday to Thursday. Now, this is at odds with the Western-style weekend. In the West, it's Saturday-Sunday. That's the weekend. And that's what most of the world follows, very not. Now, the UAE will do the same. The second reason for this change is to boost work-life balance, they say, enhance the social well-being of the UAE's workforce, increase their performance by giving them extra time to rest. How does that work? Now, this is something that several companies and countries have tried. In 2015, Iceland introduced the world's largest pilot project for a 4-day work week. The average work is 40 hours around the world. Iceland brought it down to 36 hours. It did not cut the salary of the workers for this. They were paid the same amount of money. The program lasted till 2019 and turned out to be a success. Productivity remained the same in a majority of the workplaces. Today, 80% of Iceland's workforce has opted for a 4-day work week. In 2017, Sweden launched a 4-day work week trial. It took place at a government-run retirement home. Workers were paid the same amount for lesser hours. The concept ended up making them happier and healthier, but the practice was not implemented across the country. Why is that? Because it was deemed too expensive and complicated. They had to hire additional staff, they said, to make up for the gaps left by the others. So the Swedish government gave up the plan. Then in 2018, an estate management firm in New Zealand adopted the concept. It said it paid its employees the same amount for working 4 days instead of 5. What was the result? Employee satisfaction improved, but overall performance did not. The staff was found to be more creative, but they did not turn up on time. Then in 2019, Microsoft Japan tried the same. It gave all Fridays in the month of August as paid leaves to its employees. The move boosted productivity by 40%. It resulted in a more efficient workforce. So what does this tell you? That the concept has been a mixed success. In some places, it has led to better productivity, more employee satisfaction, more efficient use of time. In other places, it became too costly to implement, or the results were not too impressive. Clearly, performance and satisfaction depend on more factors than the number of days you work. Also, shorter work weeks may not suit every business model. And here's something else I must point out. A lot of us confuse a 4-day work week with a compressed work week. And this distinction needs to be drawn. Most companies will adopt this concept and end up compressing their 40-day schedules into fewer days, when in essence, they're supposed to reduce work hours. I'll give you an example. Uniqlo, a Japanese clothing enterprise, it adopted a 4-day work week recently, only to compress 40 hours into 4 days. So instead of 8 hours a day, Uniqlo employees were working for 10 hours a day. At the end of the day, they felt more tired. So it's important to adopt these practices, not just in letter, but also in spirit for them to work. The goal should be to improve efficiency, morale, and mental health, not cutting down on one day's work only to pile it on the next day. And think about it. When you do, remember it's only Tuesday. Whichever part of the world you're in, the weekend is far. Hang in there. We'll wrap the show, leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.